I'm Rocker Gaming from the Rocker Gaming channel here on YouTube, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to mold and cast some custom buttons for your PS5 DualSense controller. So the first thing you're going to need to do is obviously rip open this controller and gain access to those buttons. One thing you want to do is make sure you buff out the buttons before you go ahead and start the molding process. With our buttons finally prepped and ready to go, it's time to build our mold box. I'm using this acrylic rectangle bar, and what I want to do is fit that registration around each of my individual buttons. So now we're going to go ahead and adhere the buttons to the actual corrugated plastic sheet or the base of our mold box. And realistically, we're just going through the exact process. We're just using a few toothpicks to do this. And the reason why is we really just don't want that super glue to get all over the place and realistically get on the sides of the buttons, because that'll cause some issues with alignment a little bit later on. Well, with all that complete, let's go ahead and set all this stuff to the side, and we'll come back to it a little bit later. For now, let's get to some of those other buttons. With that done, you're going to see me take like this sickle-shaped clay molding tool, and essentially all I'm going to do is try to get that clay to be flush up against the equator of the button. This part's not exactly what I'd call hard, but it's worth taking your time to do, because at the end of the day, the more flush it is, the less likely you are to get flashing that's difficult to clean up later on. Now the last step is to get those buttons adhered to your mold box, and to do that I just roll up a little bit of clay and use that sickle tool to adhere them. And with that done, the last thing we're going to do is take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and some Q-tips, and we're going to clean everything up. Now, the purpose of this is to get all residual oils or clays from your fingers off the buttons, and we want them to be as clean as possible. Whatever is on your button, whether it be a fingerprint, a smudge, or whatever, is going to show up in your final casting. So finally, the last step is to get the mold box adhered to your mold base. And for me, I just use some plastilina clay and just kind of force it into the corners between the base and the box with my finger. If you don't want to use plastilina clay, you could also use hot glue to do this, and that would work just as well. With all the hard work out of the way, it's time for the easy part, which is pouring some silicone. We're going to be using some Alumilite Plat 40 here. Now this specific silicone has a 35-minute working window and a 24-hour demold time. As far as actually pouring the silicone goes, it's incredibly simple. This is a 1-to-1 by volume, so I'm just going to pour parts A and parts B in here and get them measured and do the best of my ability to get it as close as possible. So when I pour my silicone, typically the way I like to do it is I like to pour into a single corner, and I like to use a very thin stream. The reason why I do it like this is, if there are any, remnant bubbles or anything like that, typically a thin stream will help them pop, and ultimately we don't want to create more bubbles by being too aggressive with our pour. So after about 24 hours, it's time to pull these things out and see how they turned out. Next up is to apply some of this silicone to silicone mold release. I use this one from Alumilite. Typically what I'll do is apply a minimum of 3 coats to this, and realistically waiting about 5 minutes for each coat to dry. In this case, we definitely want to make sure we apply enough of this, because realistically silicone doesn't stick to anything except for itself. It's time to take these out of the mold box, and we're going to very, very gently separate the two halves of the molds so as not to rip any of the silicone. Cleaning is easy enough. Just use a little bit of IPA and a Q-tip and go ahead and go over the entire mold. Like I said, just getting rid of any of the oils that are left over and other materials used. So to make the sprues in the mold, I use really 2 different things. I use a cork boring tool as well as a 14 gauge needle. And hopefully after all those sprues are cut, you end up with something that looks, similar to this. For my resin, I always go with this Alumilite Clear. It works really well. I highly recommend it. It works by measuring equal parts of A and B, and it has a 7-minute work window, which for something small like this with these buttons is absolutely perfect. Now comes my favorite part, which is ripping open the molds and seeing how we did. And honestly, these black parts look absolutely amazing. And while these black parts look absolutely awesome, putting them on a controller just brings it to the next level. Now this is that sweet custom DualSense controller I've been looking for.